everybody, welcome back to Invisible UX. Today we're going to continue the series on frames. Let's dive right in. I know it's hard to tell with the white color, but we'll get to changing the colors very soon. You can also control whether or not that frame is visible. You know what, before we move on, let's go ahead and fix that corner and make them all corners with no radius. Great. Okay, and there are just different settings for the layer here. Your typical darken, multiply, color burn, similar to what you would see in Photoshop. Okay, so you can also adjust the color of the frame itself. So this is like adjusting the color of the canvas. It won't affect the objects within it, but it will affect how it's exported. So if you want to make that blue instead of white, now you have a little bit more of a contrast. But as you place objects on the frame, it might get a little bit complicated to differentiate those. So instead of changing the color, you may want to add a stroke. So the stroke is just simply the border around the frame. You can choose if that's a little bit too much. Now, obviously, you can see the edges of the frame. And if you go back up to the radii, those will be a little bit more the effect will be a little bit more prominent there. So let's go ahead and keep the radius corners for now. You can control where the stroke appears, whether it's centered on the edge of the frame, whether it is inside or outside. If we zoom in, we can kind of see some of these differences, see how it changes location. The most obvious is if the frame is selected, we can see that stroke is inside the rectangle, outside the rectangle, and now it's centered on the rectangle. That defines the frame, okay? You can adjust the thickness of the stroke. So by default, it's 1. You can make it quite thick. You can make it probably as low as 0.1, 0.01, something like that. Similar to the manual override to the radius corners, you can independently adjust the stroke thickness on different sides of the frame. So if I just select top, it only applies that stroke to the top. If I select custom, now I can control the stroke on different sides. And then if I want to go back to all, that will just apply to all 4 sides. Okay, moving on. You can apply effects to the frame, such as drop shadow, as it's shown here, background blur, layer blur, inner shadow. And then clicking the little sun will allow you to adjust the controls. So moving on the x-axis, moving on the y, positive, negative, how blurry it is, and how much it spreads, as well as the opacity of the shadow. As far as sharing is concerned, that collaborating and sharing is a massive important aspect of Figma. We'll do a more detailed session on sharing and collaborating, but as a very high level, you can enter anybody's email to share a particular file. You can control view or edit, whether they have view or edit settings. You can control if that link is shared, if anyone with the link has access, or only people that were specifically invited according to their email can access that file. You can copy a link directly to the file. And then you can actually select if you'll usually have more than one frame, many more than one frames in a design file. You can select whether or not you want to link to that specific frame. So let's go ahead and copy the link. We selected a link to selected frame. We'll open a new Chrome window. Paste the Figma link. and then we're linked exactly to the frame that we were just looking at. So we'll dig into that a little bit deeper in a later session, but it's actually pretty cool. When you have dozens, if not hundreds of frames, you want to make sure you're linking to that specific one. So finally, a pretty critical aspect of Figma and any design tool is exporting, right? So with the export feature, we can select the size of the export, if there's a suffix, if there's multiple frames to be exported, the file type that it'll be exported into. You can see a preview, what that's going to look like. So as we modify that, draw a line. Now when we go to export, we see that line. And then we can just select export. And then you can select where to put that particular image.